Hi everyone, my name is Gaurav Malhotra and I'm a Principal Group Program Manager in the Azure Purview team. The topic for today's session is Unified Data Governance with Azure Purview. The agenda for today would be what are some of the challenges that we are seeing working with various enterprises that they're facing in the data governance space, how you can lay the foundations of effective data governance with Azure Purview. I'm going to focus a lot today on the Purview data map and the catalog application that is currently in public preview. I'll talk about what are some of the features that are supported as part of the Purview data map and catalog and what is our roadmap for that. We'll also focus on some of the customer stories and in the end, how you can get started and do some next steps with Azure Purview. So let's get started. So as I mentioned, we've been working a lot with customers and we've been finding that in a lot of organizations today, there is this emergence of a role called Chief Data Officer. So essentially, there are two ends of the spectrum where organizations are looking to centralize data discovery. They're looking to understand what data do I have in my organization? Where did that data originate? Or can I even trust that data? Whereas on the other end of the spectrum, the companies are looking to basically they're trying to understand what is the risk profile of the data. Is the usage that is happening in my organization compliant to the regulations like GDPR, CCPA? And can I control access and who can use that data? So we've been seeing this Chief Data Officer role, which is becoming increasingly interdisciplinary. So as we probe further, we find that there are some key elements that are required for doing successful data governance. The first one is that the volume, variety, and velocity of data keeps on increasing. So organizations need to manage their growing landscape. So they need to understand what exists in their hybrid data estate. The second, companies are looking to overcome operational silos. So a lot of companies today face this challenge where, like, for example, their finance, their marketing, they have duplicate data sets and they are operating within their own realm. So there's a lot of duplicate data sets that are happening and they're looking to see how they can eliminate these silos and create that central view of the data so that it increases the productivity across the organization. Now, the moment you do that, you are definitely going to increase the agility for your data that exists across your organization. And as I mentioned previously, that almost every year you see that there are these new regulations, industry regulations coming in that organizations are now required to comply in order to meet their obligations. So with that in mind, we have released this service called Azure Purview, which is in public preview. It was announced by our CEO Satya last year in December. And with Azure Purview, what we are saying today is that you can lay the foundations of effective data governance. So if I start from the bottom and make my way upwards, as I mentioned that a lot of organizations today have data all over the place, whether it is on-prem, multi-cloud, SaaS sources, operational sources. And we have these scanners that are scanning your hybrid data estate to build what we call as the Purview data map. Now, think of this data map as a graph where we are capturing key pieces of information like your technical metadata, your semantic metadata with the classifications that we are performing, your business metadata. And also this platform is conformant to open source Apache Atlas APIs, which means from an extensibility standpoint, it gives you a great advantage that you can use those open APIs to push information into the map as well. Now, on top of this Purview platform, there are different applications starting with what we call as the Purview data catalog. Now, as your data map is getting populated, you can consume the information from the data map using Purview catalog. So we have this browse and search experience, which is backed by an Elasticsearch index, which provides you recommendations, and you can essentially use it to search information in the map. There's also a business glossary experience where you can define your business context and then overlay that business context onto the assets in the map, which means that if your business users come and they use those business terms, they can use those business terms to search information from the Purview data map using the data catalog application as well. Then there is data insights, which is essentially a lot of organizations, the CDO office, the Chief Data Officer office, is looking to understand how is your data distributed across your data estate. From a compliance standpoint, the compliance admin is looking to understand what sensitive data exists in my organization. So all of that is provided as part of these reports that we publish with the data insights pillar. Now, from a consumption standpoint, there is data producers, consumers, the CDOs that we are working to service. With Purview, there's a unified experience on top of this app, these apps, which we call as the Purview Studio, which I'll show you in the demo as well. And Purview as a service is tightly integrated with other services like Azure Synapse, where today in Synapse, you can do a Purview powered search. Power BI, where you can scan your entire Power BI tenant and we can catalog your reports, dashboards, and all as well. You can scan your SQL Server and we can again catalog all your tables, your views, and create those relationships with the lineage arc as well. Similarly, Azure SQL, and we are also very tightly integrated with Microsoft Information Protection ecosystem, which means that if you have your Microsoft Information Protection labels like highly confidential, confidential, if you have described those in your organization, now they flow to your entire hybrid data estate, whether it is your Cosmos DB or SQL columns with Azure Purview as well. Now, Azure Purview today is in public preview, and I'll talk about the roadmap on what's our plan to take the service to GA as we move forward with the presentation as well. So what I'm going to be doing next is I'm going to dive deeper into each of these components and provide more information. So let's start with the Purview data map and catalog. Now, as I mentioned with Purview data map, we are working to build a graph which essentially captures key pieces of information like technical metadata. So as the scanners are running, we are capturing what are the column names, what are the column types, the description. We're also capturing lineage information to essentially say what this particular table is being fed into this transformation process, and then it's generating, let's say, a data warehouse table, and then going all the way to your presentation layer. So all of that lineage arc is also captured as part of the Purview data map. And this is an extensible model. As I mentioned, we are conformant to Apache Atlas, which means that from an extensibility standpoint, today we support a bunch of sources, as you can see in the screenshot. But Atlas is a typed system, which means, let's say you have, for example, IBM Informix that in just the fullness of time we will support as a source, but today it's not supported. But with Atlas, you can define your own custom type IBM Informix, and then use these open APIs to push that information into the map as well, right? And this, like I mentioned, there's technical metadata. Then there is semantic metadata, which is our classifications, out-of-the-box classifications that we support. Then there's business metadata that you can stamp onto the assets as well. So the way to think about Purview data map is the more scanning is going to happen, the richer the graph is going to get, and the powerful the applications like data catalog and insights on top will be, right? So the next one is, as I mentioned, with Purview data map, we are doing automated data discovery and classification, right? So we out of the box provide 30 plus sources and file formats. Our service is deployed in 22 plus regions around the world, covering most of the geographies. Currently it's 12, which are all the major geographies that exist today. We allow you to do hybrid scanning. From get-go, we have embraced the hybrid nature of the cloud, which means hybrid nature of your data state, which means you can scan your Oracle instances, your Teradata instances, your SQL Server, your Azure instances, AWS S3. So by get-go, we have embraced the hybrid nature, the multi-cloud nature, and the SaaS nature of your data state. And then we already have industry leading partnerships that gives us 100 plus sources, and we are currently working to light up those sources in our stack. So you'll see that we have great agility, and we kind of light up almost 4 sources every 1 or 2 months with 4 sources like Google BigQuery, Irwin, Looker, and Cassandra that just went live this month in August. Now, in terms of data classification, as I've been saying that in our data map, we are also capturing semantic metadata, which means that as these scanners are running, they are classifying the data to say, oh, this column is a social security number, or this column is an Australia tax file number. And today we have 200 plus out of the box classifiers across different domains like personal, government. And we also allow you to bring your own classifiers as well, which means that, let's say if you have a transaction ID column in your database, you can represent the semantics of that using a regular expression. Or you could throw us a data dictionary with a set of values. And if we detect those values, we can essentially apply that classification onto your assets in the map. And for us, everything is an asset, whether it's a SQL Server table, a Cosmos DB collection, or an Oracle instance, everything is an asset for us. And then we also are working with Microsoft Research to consistently enable these new technologies. Like, for example, for custom classifications, you could just throw us a file and we can automatically reduce that regular expression. You can define the confidence levels on how these custom classifications should be set as well. And also you could do test custom classifications as well. So what if support, like if I do this, what would happen, is also supported before you actually run onto your hybrid data estate. As I mentioned, we are in the previous slide, we are fully integrated with Microsoft Information Protection ecosystem, which means you can consistently label your sensitive data across Office, SQL Server, Azure, and Power BI with Azure Purview as well. Then there is lineage extraction. So as I mentioned in the Purview data map, that we are storing this lineage information, which means that as these scanners are running, we are capturing the nodes in the graph and the arcs that connect those nodes to understand, oh, this column is, this table is being fed into this transformation process that's running inside Data Factory or Synapse and producing this particular Synapse Analytics table. And then it's getting fed into your presentation layer in Power BI as well. So that entire lineage arc that you can see here end to end is what we are working to paint with Azure Purview, and it's one of the key use cases for Azure Purview. And we are continuously adding more and more sources that we are supporting from a lineage standpoint. Power BI is a great example. Just now we announced Power BI support for sub-artifact lineage, which means if you have columns in your data sets, how those columns in measures are essentially connected with lineage arcs, starting from the raw data, again to the transformation processes, all the way to your presentation layer, is today supported in public preview as well. And then finally, with respect to configuration and management, just like we have our visual interface, which is the Purview Studio, which I'll show in the demo, we have full support for APIs and SDKs as well, which means any operation that you can do in the user experience, you can use our APIs and SDKs to perform that as well. So once the Purview data map has captured all this information through our scanners, through classification, through the business metadata, now you can surface that information using our data catalog application on top of the Purview platform. And with this, we allow you to search and browse your information. So as I mentioned earlier, it is backed by an Elasticsearch index, which means as you're searching, it is providing you suggestions. You can the results are returned in the order of relevance, which means, for example, if you're an owner of an asset, that will be ranked higher as compared to other assets that are returned as part of your search results. So you can get relevant results back. You can then click, you can further filter them down by different ways like classification, contacts, by different asset types like a SQL Server, or you could even filter them down by business terms. And then if you find something interesting, you can look at the schema, the lineage information, the contacts, and you can browse them in a hierarchical manner as well. And there are things that we are working to add in future, like, for example, workflows and business rules, right? Now, workflows, you can think of it as that if I have a business term, right, and if I want to create a new business term, I may or may not have the rights to do it. So I could essentially create a term and trigger an approval workflow where an administrator would look at it and say, oh, if this term makes sense, then they can approve, and it becomes part of your Purview business glossary. Okay. And then the second one is around business rules, which means think of these as aggregate actions that you can essentially write rules like, if my classification is social security number and Australia tax file number, apply business term X on it, right? So you can write rules like those and we'll be able to apply those. Now, one thing I kind of mentioned earlier, but I want to kind of lay emphasis on, is that we have a full-blown business glossary experience, which means you can define your own business terms. You can essentially create those business terms in a hierarchical manner. You can stamp those business terms onto assets in the map, and then use that business context to consume information from the Purview data map using the data catalog application as well. Then the third part is around data insights. So the earlier were two pieces around Purview data map and catalog are targeted towards data producers and consumers. And with data insights, we are targeting the Office of Data Officer, who wants to understand what data assets do exist in their hybrid data estate for a particular organization. So they want to get a bird's eye view of their data estate. They want to understand what scans are running. They want to understand what are the business terms that are stamped onto assets in the map. Now, again, from a compliance standpoint, they want to understand what is the sensitive data that exists in my organization, right? And in terms of if there is sensitive data, I can actually start from these top level views and go down to the actual assets where these classifications were applied as well, right? So all of that is supported as well. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually jump into a demo and show you all of this end to end, right? So here I'm on Azure portal where I've provisioned a Purview account, and I'll not go through the steps of it. It's just like standard provisioning that you do for any Azure service. But once you provision a Purview account, you get a blade like this where you can click Open Purview Studio to launch our Purview Studio application. You can manage users, look at our documentation and some properties as you provision your Purview account as well. So if I click Open Purview Studio, it takes you to the home page of Purview Studio, where you can see that I've already cataloged millions of assets across a bunch of sources. I've defined some business terms as well. From a consumption standpoint, I can start to consume information from the Purview data map using this enterprise search. I'll come back to this in a minute. Then there are these different tiles. Now, I'm a super admin, which allows me to connect to sources, set up scans. I can browse assets, manage business terms, look at the knowledge center. But this is totally based on the role that you have in the Purview data catalog. Now, if you are just a reader, you can only browse assets. You won't be able to connect to sources and set up scans. Now, in terms of knowledge center, we have some very good information in terms of some videos that we have recorded for different features, and we keep on adding new videos over here almost every week. Blogs, any new feature that gets added in Purview, we generally announce it in our Purview blog, so you should be able to understand more about that feature. And then we have some tutorials on how to get started with Azure Purview as well. Okay. Coming back, so these are some of the recently accessed items and some quick links for you to get started. Now, let's just quickly see how easy it is to populate the Purview data map. So I'm going to click into the data map section from the left, and here I can see that I have chosen to organize my Purview data map by data centers. So we have this concept of collections, which allows you to organize your sources and assets in those sources. Now, this is fully flexible. As I mentioned, I have organized them by data centers, but in your organization, you can do it in any way you want. You can have a collection inside the collections, so it's fully flexible. Now, in terms of sources, we support pretty much everything that exists in Azure. We are starting our multi-cloud journey with Amazon S3. We do support Google BigQuery, modeling tools like Irwin. We just added the support for Cassandra. Then in terms of on-prem sources, we do have support for Oracle, SQL Server, Teradata instances, Hive Metastore, your ERP instances with SAP. And we can also scan your Power BI tenant to catalog your reports, dashboards as well. And then Google Looker is also supported from a presentation layer standpoint. Now, one important point I want to make over here is a lot of organizations are not looking to do point-wise connections. So what we have done for them is we've enabled scanning of well-known hierarchies. And what I mean by that is if you click this Azure multiple, you can see that you can just specify the management group and select a subscription, Azure subscription inside the management group. And then we will do the heavy lifting of automatically determining what are the storage accounts, what are the Cosmos DB collections, what are the SQL instances that are in that subscription, and bring those under the governance umbrella of Purview. This is a very important point because here we are doing the heavy lifting. We are listening to the Azure Resource Manager change feed, which means if you go and delete a storage account, we will automatically update the Purview data map and you don't have to do anything. And as I mentioned, we are enabling this for all well-known hierarchies. We have done this for AWS as well, which means you can just come and provide us the account ID and we will again automatically discover all the S3 buckets that are there in that account and bring those under the governance umbrella of Purview. Now, let's quickly look at how easy it is to set up the scans. So I'm going to start by showing you what scanning a subscription looks like, right? So if I click view details for this subscription that I have set up scan for, it shows my recent scan history, how many scans were run, what assets have been scanned, how many have been classified. So if I click new scan, I'm able to see that as part of registering this subscription, we have automatically discovered all the blob storage accounts, the Gen 2 accounts, the SQL database, the Synapse dedicated pools, and your Synapse Analytics workspace as well. Now, in terms of credentials, we are fully integrated with Azure Key Vault, which means we don't store your credentials, we get them on the fly, and we just use them and discard them. They don't get persisted into the Azure Purview service. And in terms of using those credentials, you can use it at a global level to say that for all these connections, use this managed identity, or you could say that for blob storage, I want to use an account key. For Data Lake Gen 2, I want to use manage identity. So it's totally up to you. And then you can pick and choose from what we have discovered to say, oh, as part of these Gen 2 discovery that you have done for me, I only want to scan A, B, or C Gen 2 accounts that are part of this subscription. So totally up to you on that. Now, going back and kind of showing you another example of, let's just pick up a particular source, right? And I'm going to show you one for a Data Lake Gen 2 that we have here. So let's just pick this one, right? So here, if I click new scan, I could do test connections to do sanity checks. I can scope my scans. So I can come in and say that as part of setting up this scan, I do not want to scan my entire data lake. I actually just want to do a portion of the lake. So I can select which containers in this data lake I want to scan. I can set up a scan rule set. So if I create a new rule set, it basically means that I'm telling this scan that when you run, you should be able to detect all these file types. So we pretty much support all the delimited file types. There is XML, Parquet, Evro, ORC. We even detect doc file types. So if your lake has .doc, .ppt, and all of those files as well, we are able to detect that, and gzip as well. And in addition, what we have learned as part of our preview program is that a lot of customers today have these custom extensions that they're using in their organization. But internally, they are nothing, either a JSON file or a PSV file, or even a custom delimiter that they use in the organization, which they can specify. But if, let's just say, it's this .cust extension files are nothing but JSON files. So you can create such mapping, and once you do that, it tells our scanner that if you detect a .cust file, treat it as a JSON file as part of the scanning process. Next, you are essentially coming in saying that as these scanners are running, run these classifications, and pretty much we have covered almost around the world in this government category, pretty much every major one that exists, with social security numbers, national numbers. Then there is financial ones that we have. And today we support 200 plus out of the box, and we are continuously working to add more. And as I mentioned, you can define these custom classifications as well, and then enable those to be applied as part of the scanning process too. Okay. So in this case, one thing I do want to mention is that as part of every source that we add in the system, we also ship a default one, which basically includes everything that we have in the system today, all the system classifications, no custom classifications, obviously, because we don't know which ones you want to run, all the file types. So this is out of the box, always existing for every source that we support. Okay. And then once you create your scan rule set, the next thing that you tell us is how often you want this particular scan to run. So you can choose to run it once, or you can say, I want to run it monthly. Again, here we have enabled productivity gestures. We can just select last, and we will automatically determine whether it is a 30-day month or a 31-day month, or it's a leap year. So all of that is automatically taken care of. And then you just go ahead and create your particular scan and done. So it's truly a serverless infrastructure where you're just coming, registering your sources, setting up scans, and we are doing the heavy lifting to provision the infrastructure, scale it up and down to give you the best in class performance. Okay. So now we have created our collection hierarchy. We have registered sources. We have set up scans. So now let's just see how we can consume information from the map. Before I go that, let's actually first look at the business glossary experience on how you can define that business context. So here you can see that you can create your new business terms, or you can bulk import them as well, right? So you can essentially say that we have a template published. If you fill in that template, you can just import that once into the system in one go. And let's just say you imported and you wanted to change, you can bulk export, do the change, and then bulk import as well, right? And we have enabled these templates where we have a system one which comes with all these attributes and these types and description. But as an organization, you can define your own templates as well. So you can come in and say that I have a banking division, or I have a human resources division, and any business term with banking division should only have these two attributes, or any business term with human resource division should only have a single attribute called data privacy. So it's fully flexible on how you want to define your business terms based on these different hierarchies that you have in your organization. Now, if I were to show you a particular business term, let's just search sales. You can see here that we do support hierarchical business glossary, which means that I have a market development and sales business term. Underneath that, I have one for Europe, one for North America, and the North America one is further, has two underneath it, one for Central US and one for Midwest region. So if I click this, I can see the definition of that particular business term, what assets have been applied this particular business term, some operational information. I can look at the synonyms, any related terms with this. Again, as I mentioned, this has a hierarchy, so I can look at all the children, and I can look at the experts and data stewards for this particular business term as well. So now I have the business context. I've stamped it onto the assets in the map. Let's go back to the data catalog portion and let's start to consume information from the Purview data map by using this browse and search experience. So here, I'm going to assume that my company has run a marketing campaign and I want to see the impact of sales by that marketing campaign. So I'm a business user and I'm going to type sales. You can see that as you type this term, the system is automatically giving you suggestions. It is automatically able to relate this business term with physical assets in the map. And if you click enter, then it has returned all the results in the order of relevance. You can further filter it down by a particular asset type, by a classification, a particular contact, by a Microsoft Information Protection label, or by business terms as well. So let's just use this business term to filter down the assets. And if I use market development and sales, I get returned these 5 tables, and the sales order header in Azure SQL is looking interesting to me. So if I click this, again, I can look at all the classifications that were applied to this particular table, the business terms, the hierarchy of this particular table, starting with the server, the database, the schema, and the actual table. I can look at some of the basic and advanced properties for this table. I can look at the schema to understand what are the column types, column names, column types, descriptions, what were the classifications that have been applied at the column level, the business terms that have been related to this. I can look at the lineage information as well. So I can come back here and say that, oh, this particular sales order table is being fed into a data factory copy activity, and it's generating this particular SQL table. Or I can see that this particular sales order table is also fed into a data flow activity in my data factory process and generating this Synapse Analytics dedicated SQL pool table. So not only you can look at the lineage at the column level, but you can also come in and look at this lineage at the column level as well to say, oh, if I were to change this column, what impact will it have downstream and upstream? And if a failure would have happened, this would have turned red, and you can do impact analysis as well. So our goal with the lineage is essentially to enable this end-to-end picture, right? Where you can see that starting from the raw data to the transformation processes, to your data warehouse table in Synapse, to your presentation layer, you're able to track that end-to-end lineage. So let's just say your business analyst is looking at a particular dashboard and they find that there's some issue with a particular data set. So they'll be able to track starting from the raw data all the way back to the dashboard on what happened if that particular column was not getting generated or if it had some bad information. Then you can look at, for a particular asset, all the experts and owners that have been assigned, and you can browse that in a hierarchical manner as well. And we support this for both structured, semi-structured, and unstructured data as well. Also, we've enabled these open-in experiences. So let's just say you search for this particular table, you find it interesting, and you want to start exploring that more. So you can straight away open this up in Power BI Desktop. Now we will automatically determine that if you have Power BI Desktop or not. If not, you can install it. And once you do, we will automatically create the pre-bits file so that as a business analyst, you can start exploring this particular data asset immediately, right? So this was from a consumption standpoint on how easy we have made for customers to search information in the Purview data map using the Purview catalog application. Now, we talked about integrations with other services, right? So one thing I do want to focus here is that this same search experience is also enabled in Azure Synapse Analytics. So here I'm in the Synapse Analytics workspace where now I can do a Purview powered search. So this is the same search bar that you saw in Azure Purview Studio, which is now available in all your Synapse workspaces as well. So earlier, you were only able to do a workspace, local workspace search in Azure Synapse Analytics. So you can imagine that if your organization has hundreds of Synapse Analytics workspaces, now if all of those are connected to a single Purview account, then you can search across Synapse workspaces, but also you can search your entire hybrid data estate because Purview is scanning your Oracle instances, your Teradata instances, your SAP instances, your Hive metastores, and all of that information is captured in the Purview data map. So again, if this particular Synapse Analytics workspace is hooked up to the same Purview account that I was showcasing you. So if I type the term sales, this is the same results that you just saw in Purview Studio are being returned in the Synapse Analytics workspace as well. And then I can essentially look at those results just like we looked at in the Purview Studio. If I just minimize this, I can again filter it down. One additional thing that we have done is that we have enabled these productivity gestures where we know, like for example, in this particular case, this table is not available in your this particular Synapse workspace. So we've enabled these productivity gestures where you can connect to it and create your link service and start to use it, or you can use it in your data flow processes to start doing ETL on top of it as well, right? So coming back, so now we have seen, we've populated the Purview data map. We have looked at the business glossary experience that we had on how you can set up the business context. We have consumed information from the map using this enterprise search as well. Now let's just switch gear and go into this data insights section where from a data officer standpoint, as I mentioned, I want to understand what data exists in my hybrid data estate. How is my data distributed? So to be able to understand that, we enable these data insights reports where you can look at that distribution. You can understand what scans have been running and whether they've been succeeding or failing. You can understand what are the business terms that exist in my organization and how they have been stamped across assets in my Purview data map. Similarly, as I mentioned, one of my favorite views is this classification report from a compliance admin standpoint to understand what sensitive data exists in my organization, right? So I can see across which domains, what were the top classifications that were applied. And I can start from these top level views and I can actually go down to the actual asset where this was applied, right? So down to the actual assets, starting from the top level views. This is one of the great use cases that we've enabled with these insights report. Now we are continuously working to add more and more reports over here to provide those insights into your hybrid data estate. All right, so I'm going to switch back to the presentation where the next focus is going to be around, as part of Purview, our goal is that you are able to make the most of your Microsoft investments, right? Where if you have data in Microsoft Azure, if you even have data across hybrid, which means your on-prem sources, your SaaS sources, your multi-cloud sources, SQL Server, M365, operational analytic data, all of that, our goal is to be able to capture that in the Purview data map so that you can discover that information. So the goal with Azure Purview right now is to lay the foundations of effective data governance so that you can understand what data exists in your hybrid data estate, so that you can use these applications on the top like catalog to discover that information. And in future, we have plans to enable other applications as well, which will consume this information from the map and enable like different actions as well. So one example, if I were to give you, like we talked about Azure Synapse, but if I were to say Power BI plus Synapse plus Purview, right? So I showed you in the demo how you can use this embedded search experience to do a Purview powered search, look at the results, and then consume that in your Synapse workspace. The same set of experiences we are working to light up in other services as well, like in future with Power BI, with machine learning. So you can essentially do a Purview powered search and discover what data exists in your organization. So I'm going to focus next on what are some of the features. So we talked about a bunch of those in the previous slide. So I'm going to just condense them to one slide and then focus on what's upcoming in the next 4 to 6 months as well. So in terms of current features, with respect to Purview Data Map, we have the automated scanning of hybrid sources. Today we support 40 plus sources and file formats. And as I mentioned, we have an industry-leading partnership that gives us 100 plus sources, and we are on a very aggressive journey to light those up. You can do automated classification with our 200 plus out-of-the-box classifiers and custom classification support. You can do that and automatically apply these classifications onto assets in your hybrid data estate. As I mentioned, we conform to this open source Apache Atlas APIs, which is great from an extensibility standpoint. As part of our Purview data catalog application, you can browse and search information in the Purview data map. We have full support for business glossary to be able to define your business terms and stamp that business context onto assets in the map. You can see end-to-end lineage. I showed you a couple of examples of how you can start from the raw data to the transformation processes all the way to the presentation layer. That's one of the biggest use cases that we are after with Azure Purview. Next, with data insights, we've enabled a bunch of reports. We saw the asset report to understand how is your data distributed across your data estate. With glossary, how is your business context applied to assets in the map. Similarly, with classifications and labeling reports. And as I mentioned, we are kind of enabling a bunch of these reports in upcoming iterations as well. And then from an integration standpoint, I showed you how tightly we are integrated with Azure Synapse with the Purview powered search, with Power BI, where you can scan your entire Power BI tenant, SQL Server, Azure SQL, and then Microsoft Information Protection ecosystem as well. Now, in terms of roadmap, what we are working on, so I'm going to break it down with the Purview platform, which comprises our Purview data map. So we are continuing to add more connectors in upcoming iterations. And in the upcoming slides, I have this whole roadmap that I'm sharing, which you can kind of use to understand what are the connectors we are lighting up. But in terms of automated scanning and classification, we're also adding support for Delta Lake support towards the end of this year, and then targeting to integrate with with common data model as well, so that we can detect those CDM files and folders and understand those traits and create those as business terms in the glossary. From a Purview data map perspective, we are working to make it fully elastic so that we can start from one capacity unit, and a capacity unit is a combination of metadata storage and API calls. And we'll start from one, and if you need more, we'll scale up, and if you don't need it, we'll scale down. So it's going to be fully pay-as-you-go model that we are working to enable. From a security standpoint, we are working to boot up fine-grained access control. So you saw the collections which you can use to create a hierarchy to organize your data map. And we are tying it down with fine-grained access control, where you can say who has access to a particular collection and all the sources and assets in that particular collection, so that you can control who sees what in your organization. And as I mentioned, as part of our releases, we have to work to release our SDKs and continuously enhance them. So that will continue to happen. Now, as I mentioned, that we are currently in public preview, and our target to GA the service is Q3 of this particular year. So by end of Q3, our goal is to GA Azure Purview platform. So this is a slide. The next couple of slides, I'm going to talk about which connectors we support today. So the green circles are the one that is already supported. The blue ones are the ones that we are working towards the remainder of this year. And I'm going to share this out so you'll know with respect to Azure, with respect to SaaS sources, with respect to multi-cloud and file formats, what is our current support and what is upcoming. And finally, with respect to data catalog, we are going to continue to focus on enhancing our data lineage proposition, where you'll see more sources supported from ADF, the Synapse pipeline support lighting up soon. With Power BI, we'll continue to invest more on that to give you that sub-artifact lineage. If you have Power BI data flows and you have transformations running, to be able to see the lineage for those transformation processes as well. And similarly for Azure SQL, if you have your stored procedures that are consuming a SQL table and kind of, transforming those. So to be able to see that entire dynamic lineage is something that we are working to ship in upcoming iterations as well. Then if you see your Purview asset today, the properties are fixed, but to be able to define your own attributes is something that we are working to add. We'll continue to enhance support so that more with our scanners, we can scan tables that have, thousands of columns. Then, as I mentioned earlier, we are planning to add support for workflows, starting with business glossary, business terms in the business glossary approval workflows, and then will eventually enhance to data access workflows as well. And then business rules that will allow you to do aggregate actions. So with that, I wanted to share a couple of customer stories that we have come working with our customers. The first one is around Grundfos, where before they were using Azure Purview, it was completely manual, where they were doing all the data governance processes using Excel. But with Azure Purview, they were essentially able to automate their data discovery and classification and create that single view of data across their entire hybrid data estate. So Grundfos is a Danish pump manufacturer that creates solutions to solve some of the water and climate change challenges. And they have used Azure Purview to completely automate their data discovery and classification processes. Similarly, Limity Bank as well, they have also used Azure Purview to get a higher level of business monitoring, and they're able to react to changes quickly because they understand what data exists there in their organization. So they have kind of increased their agility with that. In terms of next steps, we have a bunch of resources that you can use to understand what is Azure Purview. You can get started with Azure Purview. We have some quick starts. You saw that in the Knowledge Center in Purview Studio. We have tutorials in our documentation as well to get started. You can give us feedback. You can look at the Purview blog and you can subscribe to that. Almost every week we are releasing new features. So once you subscribe to that feed, you'll get the email and you'll be able to know what features have been released every week. And then you can join our discussion alias. This is being continuously monitored by product teams. So if you have any questions for us, feel free to discuss that on the discussion alias. With that, I'm going to thank you for giving me the opportunity and time to present about Azure Purview. I hope it is able to help you with laying the foundations for effective data governance in your organization. And you'll see that we have an exciting set of things planned with Azure Purview that we are working to boot up in the upcoming iterations as well. So until next time, thank you so much. Thanks.